Hi everybody, this is Agnes from Sediment, and today we're going to talk about and taste 5 dessert wine styles that everyone should know. In preparation for this video, I started asking myself, am I talking about sugar in wine too much? I just feel like it is such a misunderstood topic that I constantly gravitate towards it. And even though I do not really crave or eat sweets in general, I truly believe sweet wines can be something magical and offer flavors and complexity that dry, still wines simply can't. And funny enough, my very first YouTube video ever published 4 years ago was about sweet wines. Hi everyone, this is Agnes from Sediment, and today we're going to talk about few dessert wine styles everyone should know. Today I will be talking about and tasting all major sweet wine categories with you guys. But before we start separating these beautiful wines into neat categories, I want to say this. We are entering a world where the lines are often quite blurry. These categories can overlap and not necessarily exclude one another. So proceed with caution. We might just end up more confused about the world of sweet wines than when we started. Late harvest is actually quite tricky to define because what might be late harvest for one could be normal harvest for another. Especially nowadays, I have been talking to winemakers, and even within the same winemaking region, the harvest date for dry wines can differ by as much as 2 months. But if we put philosophy aside, a late harvest basically means that we allow extra time for sugars to concentrate in the grapes while they are still hanging on the wine. Of course, as weather becomes increasingly unpredictable in autumn, this approach is risky. And depending on how long these grapes are left on the wine, some might become seriously dried by the time they are harvested. And some might be even affected by botrytis, which we will be talking about later in this video. All of these elements will impact the style and flavors of the final wine. Stylistically, late harvest wines tend to be least sweet in the sweet wine family. However, that depends greatly on the region and the winemaker. In general, these are luscious, ripe fruit-driven wines with dense, often oily texture and full body. Technically, some of the wine styles I will be talking later in this video, like Eiswein and botrytis-affected wines, are like subgenre of late harvest wines. But they are so unique in style and expression that they have earned their own category. Some of the most well-known examples of late harvest wines include Vendange Tardive in Alsace, though keep in mind, some producers will actually make this category dry. And Auslese in Germany, which by the way can also be made in dry style. And today I decided to taste not your usual late harvest sweet wine suspect, if I may say so. So today we are going to taste this really rare gem, which is Gran Constance from Groot Constantia. And this one comes from South Africa. And these wines are usually really rare to get and they're quite expensive. And I went out of my way to get this wine on this table. And look at that absolutely beautiful bottle. And these wines are made from probably one of the most aromatic grape varieties out there, which is Muscat, Muscat Blanc à Petite Grain, though, let's be honest, it does show some color here. And because Muscat is really ancient, old grape variety, it has red color mutation. And in this case, it seems that there maybe have been added some of that red colored Muscat as well, because it does show that kind of orangey hint. On the nose, this wine is super intense and it shows that really kind of golden raisin and grape aroma. Also some mango peel, dried mangoes though, oranges. Let's taste this wine. The first sip, and I'm asking myself what there is not to like in these wines. I mean, the intensity and the balance, it is just so beautiful. I absolutely adore this style. It has really kind of sweet, luscious fruit-driven palate, but it never finished cloaky or dull. It just had that enormous freshness as well. This is the liquid gold. It just shows so much bursting fruit on the palate. It is just so intense and concentrated. It is absolutely lovely to enjoy. It is like a bite in this really overripe, but haven't gone bad yet, but like really ripe, overripe mango or tangerine. You know, it is like Christmas in the glass. Absolutely beautiful bottle. I love this wine. And the finish, the aftertaste, it just, I'm talking with you and I still feel all those fruit, all those flavors, you know, kind of sticking to your palate. It's just never-ending story with this wine. It's beautiful. And I will give this wine 96 points. I love it. This is poetry in the glass. As I mentioned before, allowing grapes to dry on the wine can be tricky due to unpredictable weather. Plus, as grapes ripen on the wine, the acidity drops. So in a way, it is actually safer to harvest the fruit earlier while the acidity is still high and then dry the grapes off the wine. During the drying process, it is water that evaporates, naturally concentrating sugars and other elements in the grapes. It might seem irrelevant at first, but where and how the grapes are dried, whether in open air, under the sun, or in well-ventilated rooms, has a real impact on the final style and flavor of the wine. For example, grapes dried outdoors tend to develop more caramelized and burnt sugar notes, while those dried indoors typically show flavors of dried fruit like figs, raisins, and sticky dates. You will also notice that wines made from grapes dried outside will often have deeper, more brownish color than wines made from grapes dried inside. Currently, the most popular examples of this style can be found in Italy. Think of Recioto, Passito, and Vinsanto. You will also find Vinsanto styles in Greece. Many of these wines are often aged in small, old wooden barrels, which adds even more complexity through slow oxidation process. Okay, so for example, this wine is 2011 vintage. So this is Frescobaldi, Pomino Vinsanto, and it has been aged in these small wooden barrels for 7 years. It is really interesting though, because Vinsanto sometimes is a wine that people laugh at. When I was preparing for this video, I read a lot of articles laughing and saying that sometimes you can get this absolutely beautiful wine that you can bottle, and sometimes it is just vinegar when you open the barrels. And it is true because of that really long aging process and that drying process of the grapes as well. You can have really high volatile acidity in the wine, and some people that are more sensitive to it might dislike it, but I think it is part of the style essentially. So, this is completely different style from the wine that I tasted before, from the very beginning. This is like this intense dried berry character, raisins, dates, figs, but at the same time it has that kind of chocolatey element, that kind of dark chocolate flavors and some caramel as well. Actually, now it kind of opens up and those dried fruit characters move away and they bring more space for the dried candied oranges. Before we taste, you will see that this wine has way deeper color than maybe other wines that are made from dried grapes, because this wine has been going through drying process in the open air. Let's finally taste it. The refreshingly high acidity level that this wine packs is amazing, and it lifts the wine, it elevates it, it makes it feel fresh and zesty. And it is not the sugar that I feel on the aftertaste, it is these dried and candied fruit characters, these dried and candied oranges and lime blossom. It is really amazing the balance that they can achieve. On the nose, this wine is constantly developing. Now it shows some of that toastiness, you know, maybe some nuttiness even, like toasted walnuts, and maybe slightly burnt caramel. It is really layered wine and I like it a lot. I will give this wine 93 points. Now, here comes the fun part. The organism responsible for noble rot and grey rot is actually the same, Botrytis cinerea. It is the weather conditions that determine whether the grapes will simply rot and become unusable for quality wine or transform into golden, slightly shriveled raisins packed with a bunch of flavors. Here is your answer for nature versus nurture, I guess. The ideal conditions for noble rot are humid, foggy mornings followed by sunny, dry afternoons. The grapes are affected, but dry and sunny weather afterwards prohibits the formation of grey rot. Botrytis has a strong influence on the flavors of the wine. It can be so intense that even as little as 10% botrytized grapes can significantly impact the aroma and palate. Expect notes of beeswax, saffron, and honeyed ginger. While I have come to understand that sometimes winemakers will take control in their own hands and promote infection of botrytis themselves, there are winemaking regions where its occurrence is more common than others. Think Sauternes, Topaque, and Nigl. And like with other molds, which botrytis essentially is, it starts with a single berry. How and when these grapes are harvested plays a huge role in the wine's final style. If the producer harvests whole bunches in a single walkthrough, the effect of botrytis will be less. But if the grapes are picked individually across several passes through vineyard, we are going to get very concentrated, dense wine, rich in botrytis-driven flavors. And of course, the very first winemaking region that comes to your mind when you think about botrytis sweet wines, at least for me, is Bordeaux. And in this case, it is not Sauternes, it is Barsac, from a state which is highly regarded, Doisy-Daene. And I have been incredibly lucky to visit them myself. I will say that this wine is a bit shyer than I expected it to be. It shows more floral white blossom elements, but also somewhere there in the background you get this kind of candied orange, cooked oranges. But it is like, first of all, it shows all these floral elements. It is so unique. And now we are starting to have this kind of really ginger spice on the nose. So the wine opens up, it develops in the glass. Let's taste it. Now, botrytis-affected sweet wines, they have the viscosity, they have the mouthfeel that the previous two wines that I tasted just simply don't have. It is just kind of slightly oily almost on the palate, and it adds extra depth or a texture, if you will. We are talking about absolutely beautiful balance here. And sometimes these wines can seem full-bodied, maybe, or too opulent. This is definitely not the case. This is really kind of lively, fresh fruit driven. And then occasionally you feel here and there some of these kind of spiced ginger, honey ginger characters. I will give this wine 93 points. Eiswein. Now, this is a category that is seriously under the threat nowadays. To produce Eiswein, the winemaker not only has to risk their fruit through unpredictable autumn and winter weather, protect it from birds and other animals looking to snack, but also hope for temperatures way below zero at some point during the winter. And that is becoming increasingly rare. Grapes for these wines are often harvested at night. According to stories from winemakers, you could inform your team about the harvest and cancel last minute multiple times simply because grapes were not frozen. What happens on the wine is that the water inside the grape freezes, and during the pressing, it gets separated from the rest of the elixir in form of ice crystals. Yes, I am calling it elixir, not juice, because it is so incredibly dense and rich with sugars. Despite being one of the latest harvested categories in the sweet wine world, sometimes harvested in January, ice wine shouldn't have any botrytis character. So the final wines tend to be filled with intense pure fruit characters. Germany and Canada are the countries most closely associated with the production of Eiswein. However, Hungary and Austria also produce some exciting examples. And I want to really stress this. True Eiswein means that the grapes are frozen on the wine, not after harvest in the freezer, which is a completely different thing. Different grape varieties can be used to make Eiswein, though they must be able to stay healthy on the wine for a long time. Most are made from Riesling, but in Canada, Vidal Blanc and Cabernet Franc are also used. But today we're going to taste Gruner Veltliner Eiswein from Krems from producer Nigl. On the nose, I can tell you straight away, I could not be able to say that this is sweet wine because it feels just so fresh and lively, fruit-driven. Like you feel that it is riper style of the fruit, you know, like maybe later harvested apples and pears and maybe occasional melon. But there's nothing really sticky or dried or cooked in here. It is really pure, bright fruit profile. And it also has that kind of lemon or lime kind of juices in it. It's bursting with a lot of freshness and a lot of energy here. And even like color-wise, it is really relatively pale. Let's taste it. Wow. For the longest time, ice wines have been one of my favorite categories of sweet wines because I don't know what it is, but the acidity is usually really, really high here as well. And this is no exception. The very first sip felt dry and the very finish felt dry. It is the sweetness on the middle that kind of plays with your mind a little bit. But otherwise, this wine is just packed with freshness. And if I would want to be really adventurous, I would maybe even experiment with this wine pairing with some savory dishes. Why not? The acidity is there, the body is there. And this example, I think, is towards a drier style of an ice wine because ice wines can be really sweet. This one, I think, has residual sugar of around 150, 160 grams per liter, maybe. But the freshness is absolutely amazing. I just love how the nose is not telling you a thing, how sweet the wine is going to be. I will give this wine 91 point. Last but certainly not least is another beautiful way to preserve sweetness in wine through fortification. This means that a strong spirit is added before alcoholic fermentation is finished. That sudden spike in alcohol arrests the fermentation process while retaining the remaining unfermented sugar. Probably the most famous sweet fortified wine is port. But don't forget about Madeira, Sherry, Marsala, and Vin du Naturel such as Rivesaltes and Banyuls. They all are exceptionally great sweet fortified wine styles. These wines can be made from a single vintage, often one of outstanding quality, or they can be blends of several vintages. Sweetness levels vary greatly depending on the style and on the house. So does the maturing process. Some are aged in a very oxidative manner, developing intense flavors of toasted nuts and preserved berries, while others will be full of rich, bursting fruit. One of the most unique styles, Madeira, is born through slow heating process, adding flavors of dried oranges and caramel to the wine. For me, this is super exciting category and I absolutely love fortified wines. But unfortunately, they are becoming increasingly rare and losing popularity, despite their incredible complexity and deep historical importance. The fortified wine category is usually closely linked with Europe, but today I wanted to find something that is really authentic outside of Europe, and I went to Rutherglen, Australia. And when we think of Rutherglen, we usually think of Rutherglen Muscat. But today I decided to try Topaque, which is made from Muscadel. So completely different style. Oh my God, style. So we see that color-wise, it is just beautifully amber color. And it is so syrupy. It is the most dense wine, intense on the structure, on the texture, the viscosity. And the nose, it is just so fresh, but at the same time you feel that kind of butterscotch, those citrus fruits, those candied, you know, maybe cooked, caramelized citrus fruit characters as well. Let's taste it. All right, so this is kind of unique style amongst all the wines that I've been tasting today. So first of all, I had to ask myself, what is the alcohol level? Because it says it is 17.5 fortified. However, it is really beautifully balanced, that I did not feel that elevated alcohol level. I didn't feel the burn or warming sensation. So it was really nicely wrapped within all that fruit, that viscosity, that body of the wine. And then I had all that lusciousness, that sweetness, that kind of, that sugary palate. And one thing that maybe I missed slightly here was the acidity, because all previous 4 wines had this really bursting, kind of really elevated kind of acidity. Similarly, as it tells you on the nose, being this really intense, concentrated, dense type of wine, on the palate, it tells you the exact same story that you see and that you smell. It is really kind of luscious and oily and dense and sticky to your tongue. And then interestingly, the very first sip and the very last kind of finish, it is this kind of baked, slightly caramelized, kind of maybe, I don't know, some kind of that toastiness, that toasted, that vanilla element, like it adds kind of extra layer, extra depth to this wine. This is really unique style. I rarely get to taste these wines, so for me as well, it is super interesting and exciting. It is very difficult to find these kind of labels in my market, at least. And I will give this wine 92 points. So here you go. These are 5 sweet wine categories that everyone should know. And I really hope if you were not completely convinced before, then maybe now you are willing to taste and maybe try some of these wines. You saw that all of these wines were in the small sized bottles. The reason for this is because they're really expensive to make, so of course you're kind of trying to bring down the initial payment of the wine, but also we are not enjoying them as much. But I'm always happy to have like a small sip at the end of the dinner. Instead of having full set of dessert, I'm happy to have that kind of small, beautifully complex, exciting glass of sweet wine. And the diversity of styles within the single category, it is just amazing. It is impressive. Each single wine was unique on its own. And within that category, there are hundreds and hundreds of wines as well that we could talk about and taste. And if you enjoyed this video, please let me know. Should I be making more in-depth videos about these categories? I would really want to, but I also would like to know whether or not that is something that interests you. I mentioned that one of the most exciting fortified wine categories for me is also Madeira. So make sure to watch my other video where I tasted more than 100 years old Madeira. Oh, the acidity.